Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this, the third in a series of webinars from the Centre for the Advancement of Positive Behaviour Support at Bild. The aim of the webinars is to support the development of PBS practice, and we are grateful to the Department of Health, NHS England, and Skills for Care for their support. Today's webinar is about active support, engagement, opportunity, relationships and choice. And our presenter is Dr Sandy Toogood of Bangor University. Sandy is a doctoral board certified behaviour analyst with a special interest in using person-centred behavioural approaches to help people with intellectual disabilities overcome challenging behaviour and live ordinary lives in the community. He has combined clinical work with teaching and has contributed to various professional and academic journals and books. And he is a trustee of Bild. I'd just like to quickly remind you that there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so do send in your questions using the entry box at the bottom of your screen. And the presentation slides will be available to download on the Bild website at bild.org.uk/CAPBS Webinars, an address that will appear on the screen at the end of the webinar. I'd now like to hand over to Sandy.
Good morning. Welcome to this presentation and thank you for joining me. It's good to have you here. This talk is about active support. The title of the talk is Active Support, Engagement, Opportunity, Relationships and Choice. In addressing this topic, I'm going to say something about what active support is. I will also say something about the background in which active support developed and how it aligns with a system of values and is underpinned by an empirical technology. I will talk a little about active support research and review some of the working methods in active support and how they can create opportunity, relationships, and choice. Active support is essentially about creating opportunities and providing the support people with intellectual disabilities need to do things, ordinary things, everyday things, things that most people take for granted, things that are so ordinary that they may appear mundane, at least in the context of a busy and fulfilling life. Things like washing the dishes, cleaning the fridge, and making the bed. It doesn't end there, however. Active support also includes doing things like going out, visiting friends, or watching a show. And there's always time for a natter, just spending time with someone. Researchers use the term engagement to describe the act of taking part, or put another way, participating in an activity. But not any old activity will do. To count as engagement, a person must take part in activity that is functional, that is meaningful and that is purposeful, activity that is culturally relevant and valued. Engagement divides into two major forms. There's activity engagement, which is doing something, and social engagement, which is interacting with someone. These are not mutually exclusive, of course. They can occur together or independently. So, for example, you could butter a slice of toast, which is activity engagement, while you're chatting to your partner, which is social engagement. Equally, you could butter toast on your own or talk to your partner when you're not buttering toast. Engagement opportunities affect our quality of life, even though many of us complain that we have too much to do. And we may say that we don't care much for mundane activities, like taking care of ourselves or doing the housework. However, most of us wouldn't take well to having these opportunities removed. Why? Well, because giving it up would involve surrendering control, that sense of autonomy over what we do, when we do it, with whom we do it, and how it gets done. We might like change every now and again when on a holiday, for example, but surrendering our autonomy over the long term is a different thing altogether. You may have heard about services for people with intellectual disabilities operating a hotel model of care. This describes how services tend to do things for a person or to a person, often out of kindness, rather than with a person. A bit like a hotel that cooks and cleans and mends and makes things on your behalf and and so on. Now, I don't know about you, but even when I'm on holiday, I sometimes miss having the opportunity to make a cup of coffee or a sandwich when I feel that I want one. This really is about autonomy and choice, and it's an aspect of active support that I want to explore today. Researchers have looked closely at the lived experience of people with intellectual disabilities when living away from the family home in different sorts of environments such as hospitals, and in small community homes. What they've found is that engagement levels compared to people in the non-disabled population are quite low. People tend to spend a lot of time with nothing to do and no one to talk to. This is true even in highly staffed community services. A second finding is that engagement levels vary according to behavioural ability. People with severe disabilities tend not to be as engaged as people with a mild or a moderate level of disability. And a third finding is that assistance from staff or carers can compensate for the degree of disability. But assistance in many service environments, A, tends to be scarce, and B, tends to go to individuals who are behaviourally more able. You could argue that this are people that need it the least. So, is this about choice? Are people choosing to do nothing? Should we not respect that choice? Are we not all happier when we have nothing to do? Well, maybe. But I think the issue in services is very often about passivity being forced on people by circumstances. Passivity occurring as a function of lack of experience leading to uninformed choice, lack of support making participation too difficult, low expectation robbing people of opportunity, service design that means staff do most of the everyday activities and so there's no chance for people to look after themselves, to cook, to clean or to shop. This leaves too much time to fill with leisure activities, many of which are too expensive or complicated for people with severe intellectual disabilities to do anyway. So we resort to inexpensive childlike activities like flicking catalogues or craying in colouring books, activities that reinforce stereotypes of people with disabilities as useless, incompetent, or the eternal child. Now think for a moment how you respond in situations when you're forced to do nothing, in the dentist waiting room or when your flight has been delayed. Do you seek out things to do? Does Country Life magazine suddenly become interesting? Do you find yourself pacing up and down the concourse, reading the small print on notice boards over and over again? Basically, we are designed to be active, to engage with our environment, and we don't much like it when we can't. Now, doing things can be a challenge for some people. Being asked to engage in activity is sometimes experienced as a demand, and that can evoke escape behaviour. Learning to do things is a worthy goal, however, because it opens up so many possibilities for a better and more fulfilling life, for spending time with others, for accomplishing and achieving personal goals, and for enjoying improved physical and mental wealth and well-being. In my talk, I want to touch on active support and its impact on autonomy and choice. I think these are important aspects of active support that have received less attention than outcomes associated directly with activity and social engagement. First, I want to provide a bit of background on active support, and then I'll say something about how I think active support creates opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities to act with greater autonomy. And then I'll also say something about active support and its impact on relationships. I want to introduce this part of my presentation by talking about three things that change the world of intellectual disabilities for the better. In no particular order, these are normalization theory, applied behavior analysis, and the deinstitutionalization movement. I hope you will see how these three things are expressed in modern-day services, at least at an inspirational level, and how their effects are felt in policy and day-to-day service delivery. The principles of normalization originated in Denmark in 1959 as part of a policy to make society fairer, more inclusive and more equal. These ideas were developed in Sweden and North America throughout the 1970s and became popular in Britain towards the end of that decade. During the 1980s, normalization was renamed social role valorization. This was partly to counter a commonly held misconception that normalization was about denying disability and making people conform to an arbitrary stereotype of what is normal, and partly to make clear that the true meaning of normalization was invested in helping people who are at risk of being devalued within society to establish and maintain personal and public identities that are valued by adopting valued social roles. To valorize is to esteem, hence social role valorization. Normalization theory is not taught as extensively as it was during the 1990s, but its contribution can be felt in person-centered planning and in government policy that emphasizes equality and inclusion, especially in intellectual disability services, with policies such as valuing people in England. A second development that changed the world of intellectual disabilities is applied behavior analysis. The development and application of applied behavior analysis in intellectual disability services occurred quite independently of the development and dissemination of normalization theory, but it occurred at more or less the same time. It really started in applied behavior analysis, the dissemination of, in the 1960s, although there are earlier accounts such as observations made by Fuller in the late 1940s. But it was in the 1970s that behavioral approaches began to be disseminated more widely. A huge wave of optimism washed through services as practitioners demonstrated techniques for teaching new skills and for reducing or eliminating unwanted behavior. These same techniques were applied to support the learning and training of staff. Core principles in applied behavior analysis were based on behavior being strengthened or weakened by functionally related consequences. Researchers and practitioners developed techniques to support learning, such as task analysis, prompting, and fading. For a time, applied behavior analysis practitioners became more interested in techniques than process, and the emphasis on analysis was lost. The effects of applied behavior analysis in services live on, however, and although ABA, as it's known, became unpopular for a time and was wrongly associated only with aversive conditioning, its effects can be seen nowadays in education, in organization, behavior management, in behavioral safety at work, as well as in clinical populations, including work with people with intellectual disabilities and people that have mental health difficulties. A third development that changed the lives of many was deinstitutionalization. Up until the onset of the 1990s, adults and children with intellectual disabilities were accommodated in large, segregated institutions. These were impersonal, barren environments that robbed people of their personal identities and of opportunities to learn, develop, and grow, to do things for themselves, and to exercise any form of personal autonomy. Large institutions were set away from mainstream communities. Doctors, nurses, cooks and cleaners and porters staffed these environments. And other services such as dental and hairdressing or tailoring were either provided on site or brought in. People were forced to conform to institutional routines so that groups of residents were got up, dressed, washed at the same time by staff every day. People often spent time between meals in a day room, often with nothing to do. Meals and drinks were pre-prepared and dispensed by staff at fixed times of the day. Tea would be dispensed lukewarm with milk and sugar already added. Staff had separate toilets, crockery, meals and drinks, and they wore uniforms to cement their status and differentiate their social identities. Staffing was very lean, sometimes 2 to 30 residents, or even 2 to 60. So-called high grades, people with a mild or moderate disability, were recruited as unpaid assistants to look after the so-called low grades. And those were people with a severe or a profound degree of disability. These conditions, of course, fostered abuse, and a series of scandals at the turn of the 1970s led ultimately to the re-provisioning of services throughout the 1990s. The aim was to close long-stay hospitals and replace them with small community homes. In the new pattern of services, small groups of people would staff small community homes, which, because of their scale and proximity to community facilities, would provide plenty of opportunity for people with intellectual disabilities to live ordinary sorts of life, doing ordinary things, just like everyone else. This did not happen by itself, and in many cases, people simply exchanged one setting for another, rather than one lifestyle for another, as was intended. A small group of researchers working on this problem came up with a system of work that eventually became known as active support. So what is active support, and where did the ideas come from? Well, the ideas that underpin active support are nested in those three things that changed the world of intellectual disabilities that I mentioned in my introduction. The core values in active support align perfectly with the core values in normalization theory, or social role valorization. The simplest expression of these ideas is in John O'Brien's 5 accomplishments. These are having a presence in the places that define a community, being part of a network of relationships of different types and intensity, having power over small and large life-defining matters, that's choice and personal autonomy, having the ability, opportunity, and support necessary to do interesting things, things that are meaningful, purposeful, and valued. And then finally, supporting behaviour and appearances that make a person feel good about themselves and that make others treat that person with respect. The technology in active support, what makes it work, comes from applied behaviour analysis. Active support adopts basic principles from learning theory, especially the principle of positive reinforcement, to strengthen behaviour, and the power of social interaction and how that is deployed as a source of encouragement and motivation. To help people participate in activity with the greatest chance of success, active support makes use of techniques such as task analysis, which is breaking down complex activities into their smaller, more manageable component steps. Graded assistance, which is adjusting the amount of support and help from least to most and most to least according to what a person needs at each step in a task analysis on a particular given occasion. And making opportunities for interaction just generally more abundant in the context of activity and engagement rather than just when problems arise. So active support procedures also seek to make life less effortful, more predictable, and easier for people with intellectual disabilities to take control. And it does this by developing and supporting personal routines. Personal routines are not like the institutional routines found in the old-fashioned hospitals. Institutions develop their routines mainly for the purposes and the benefit of the institutions themselves. People with intellectual disabilities simply had to comply with them. In contrast, personal routines feature in most of our daily lives. They're a convenient way for us to get things done without having to think too hard or for too long about how to do them. They allow us to get things done the way we like to do them ourselves and not someone else's way. When we share our home with others, we synchronize our routines with other people's routines. They work in concert with our partners and with our children. No one really notices personal routines in action until things go wrong. For example, when someone gets in the shower too early or too soon in the morning. On the one hand, routines help us because they are stable and predictable. On the other, they are not so rigid that they cannot be altered to suit circumstances. Rigidity was one of the problems with the institutional routines. They tended to be inflexible and immovable and could easily get in the way. For example, staff shift patterns in the institutions would often determine the timing of bedtime routines so that people could be getting ready for bed as early as 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. In active support, flexibility of routine comes from interspersing anchor activities. Those are the activities that occur roughly at the same time in the same place every day or every week, with spontaneous activities. These can be selected from a menu of options, but not always. For example, if an old friend called you up and invited you out for a drink midweek, you wouldn't want to turn him down because it was Wednesday, and Wednesday is when you clean your bedroom. You'd want the flexibility to skip it for 1 week or to move bedroom cleaning to another day. So adopting this kind of approach in services for people with intellectual disabilities allows people with those disabilities to choose from a manageable range of options. Or if they don't already have those skills, they get to learn how to choose. Now, for an example, I want you to consider a kind of a no-choice scenario in which nothing is happening and there's no support available and there's no one to talk to. And compare this with a two-option choice. Would you like to polish your shoes or read your magazine? Or a sequencing choice. We have 3 things to do before lunch: lay the table, water the plants, and call your mum. Which would you like to do first? I hope and expect that you can see the advantages inherent in the last 2 examples and how they are not present at all in the first. Now imagine that scenario integrated with a system of activity support planning that is paired with a system of augmented communication, a system that works for you, things like visual schedules or objects of reference, now next boards and so on. And imagine the power and how liberating that could be. Another related feature in active support is the use of scripts. Scripts spell out how an activity is done so that it is done more or less the same way every time. The way the person whose home it is, and not according to the whim or preference of the staff member who happens to be present at the time. Scripts iron out differences that are unhelpful. In fact, I often think about ironing in a more literal way when explaining how important consistency can be. Ask any group of people how to iron a shirt, and the range of answers will surprise. To begin with, people vary about what is ironed, how often and when. Some don't iron anything, some do, but only when a garment is needed, and some iron everything in sight and stack it all neatly away. Then, taking ironing a shirt as an example, some people will start with the collar, some with the left or the right sleeve, and others with the left or right front panel, and so on. Now, each method is fine for each person. It gets the job done, but imagine you're a person with a learning disability, so for you, learning is more difficult than for most other people. Then imagine you rely on a group of staff to provide help. On a Monday, you start with the collar. The helper says, no, start with the sleeves. On a Tuesday, you start with the sleeves. You have a different helper, and she says, no, start with the cuffs. Now, imagine that scenario repeated thousands of times, and after a lifetime of being told, no, not like that, like this, I think you'd either give up or simply wait to be told what to do next, something we refer to as prompt dependency, or you might even engage in some form of challenging behaviour yourself. Now, the same technologies are used to support learning by staff, which has for a long time been invested in combining knowledge-based learning with skills-based coaching, usually in the workplace, where the newly trained behaviour will occur. Systems of coaching, such as interactive training, apply all of the same principles from applied behaviour analysis to support and sustain behaviour change in staff. So, does active support work? Well, Yes, it does. And it doesn't seem to matter which version of active support is used. What does seem to make a difference is combining knowledge-based learning with on-site coaching during staff training, making sure that everyone on the team participates and ensuring the training is completed within a reasonably short time frame. Engagement is the main outcome measured in active support research. There are 7 major studies and many smaller ones. There are at least 3 narrative reviews and there's 1 systematic review. That found that active support is a promising intervention. Data from all of these studies suggests that in pre-intervention settings, or non-active support settings, engagement levels are predicted by behavioural ability and by assistance from staff. Social interaction generally, and staff assistance particularly, are often in short supply, even in highly staffed community homes. The deployment of staff assistance is often inversely related to need, so that people with severe disabilities who require more support and assistance tend to be overlooked. And engagement among people with a severe or profound level of intellectual disability is often very low. After active support training or in active support services, staff assistance tends to increase, and this usually is only seen in training when on-site and classroom training is combined. The deployment of staff assistance better matches the behavioural ability of clients, so that people with a greater need for support and assistance tend to receive more from staff, and client engagement correspondingly increases, and these effects are observed to maintain over time for at least up to a year after the point of intervention. But these are measures of engagement. How do they relate to practical expressions of autonomy and sustaining relationships? The answers, I think, are in the effects of supporting personal routines and empowering choice. In 1994, Peter McGill and I suggested active support environments are characterized by support and assistance rather than demand and control, interaction that occurs mainly in the context of activity and social engagement, and activity materials that are readily and predictably available. Service environments with these features tend to produce support that is flexible, person-centered, and delivered in ratio to need. They tend to produce environments that are stable and predictable, but that have also that degree of flexibility. They tend also to have consistency in the nature and the type of support that they provide. Now, think about that support as being the product of a particular type of interaction. Then think about spending time with a person whose social skills are not well developed and for whom reciprocating interaction might be difficult. Then think about the possibility of sharing time with that person that is framed by participating in an activity together. How much easier and more genuine would that be? Not only can you spend time with the person in a positive context, rather than ignoring or telling the person off, but you will have at least 3 opportunities for interacting around that everyday activity. First, you can say what you're going to do. Second, you can talk about what it is you're doing as you do it. And third, you can say what you just did. You can multiply that up by a number of activities that a person can do in a day, and you can see that that produces a very rich and dense frame of opportunity for interacting with other people. But even then you're not done, because you can share with other people in the environment what it is you plan to do and what it is that you did together. So every interaction then is a learning opportunity and an opportunity for social engagement, and a moment that has inherent value in and of itself. In addition to all of that, practicing those skills many, many times a day will provide a rich pool of opportunity and create a virtuous circle of accomplishment, leading to more opportunity, leading to further accomplishment and even more opportunity. Over time, not only will the quantity of interaction improve, but also its quality, its value, and its meaning. This is likely to help people with intellectual disabilities see themselves in a positive way, as a learner, a contributor, a helper, a leader, a doer, an achiever, a winner. And it's also likely to influence the perception of others. In a sort of way, it's about fulfilling valued social roles. Two direct consequences of activity and social engagement then are A, relationships will be easy to make and maintain, and B, autonomy and control become a real possibility in people's lives. But as I said earlier, these things do not happen by themselves. Earlier I talked a little bit about deinstitutionalization and the promise it held for improving people's lives. And there have been many improvements, but really from a very low starting point. It's true that nowadays few people are made to share clothing, institutional routines, and even items considered very personal, such as false teeth, towels and face cloths. There have been improvements in people's health care, and there is greater access to the same range of services we all use to maintain our health and social well-being. But still there are many inequalities, and too many people with intellectual disabilities are forced to adopt a passive role in running their own lives. Intellectual disabilities may compromise a person's ability to choose and impair his or her ability to spend time with others, but with focused support these things can be overcome. Active support is focused support. Making choices and taking control are really broad classes of behaviour made up of many component skills. So too is sustaining relationships. Now, few people will be completely lacking in all the skills they need to do these things, and the skills they do have will surely provide a secure start point for learning and development, even if this occurs only through frequent opportunities for regular practice. In the meantime, other people can act as a type of a prosthetic, making up the difference, doing the tiny parts of complex activities that a person cannot yet do for himself or herself, filling in the gaps, providing extra bits of focus, help and support here and there. This is active support. The clue really is in the name. Active support provides support that is active, not passive. Support that anticipates, that creates, that delivers. Support that is neither lazy nor simply reactive. Support that strives. Support that works. Active support also creates and supports a context that creates opportunities for activity and social engagement. For example, by helping people spend time in places that other people spend time, the opportunities for meeting groups of people increase, and there are plenty of examples about how to behave. The combination of opportunity and learning will help make friendships more likely. In an enriched social context, focused goal-based behavioral interventions might be used to stimulate even more opportunity and create even more learning, thereby further increasing the likelihood of developing and sustaining relationships. Similarly for autonomy, I suggested earlier that our sense of autonomy comes from having a feeling of exerting control over lots of small everyday things, like taking sugar in tea, and large life-defining matters, like deciding where to live and who to live with. In adopting active support, staff become enablers. They provide support and assistance in just the right amount and at just the right time. They are in the business of enabling outcomes, of handing back control, whether by minimizing prompt dependency, maximizing expectation, or simply by making choice meaningful. We all learn how to choose through graduated exposure, through practice, and by living with the consequences of what we decide to do. It should be no different for people with learning disabilities, except that some people will need little bits of additional support here and there. Relationships and personal autonomy depend on many things, including interaction and opportunity. In active support, staff learn how to provide moment-to-moment support for activity and for social engagement. But they also learn how to create and support positive social contexts at home and in the community to help create and sustain self-worth and a sense of competence and ability. The main outcomes in active support are activity and social engagement. I hope I've shown in a small way how these are important in themselves, but also how they relate to and facilitate other sorts of outcome, for example, regarding relationships and personal autonomy. So to conclude this webinar, let me summarize what I've attempted to do. First, I began by addressing the question of what is active support. Here I suggest that active support is a system of working derived from principles and procedures developed within the field of applied behavior analysis, which is grounded in a set of values first articulated in normalization theory and later social role valorization. I explored how active support developed in the context of deinstitutionalization and opportunities presented by a new pattern of services. I summarized the main themes from active support research regarding activity and social engagement. Next, I shared some of the working methods from active support and how these can help people increase opportunities and establish autonomy and control and make and sustain relationships. I suggested these outcomes are partly related to the quality and effectiveness of momentary support, partly to the expectations of others, and partly in regard to managing context. In adopting active support, staff discover how participating in activity can provide a context for spending time with people whose social skills are not well developed and for handing back control. Adopting, implementing and sustaining active support requires leadership and vision. Staff require support, supervision and feedback, which I have not discussed here in any detail. I look forward to participating now in a discussion with you and answering some of the questions that you may have.
Hello, good morning. Sandy Toogood here, ready to take any questions arising from the presentation. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to the presentation, and encourage you to send in any questions that you might have, any questions that might have arisen during the course of the talk. You can do this by typing into the box, and I'll pick up the questions and then do my best to provide an answer. I've just got my first question coming in now, so I'll take a look at this now. Not necessarily active support question, but you mentioned that classroom and on-site training is best. Do you know a reference for this? This sort of finding of combination of approaches in training really comes from a body of work in active support. So checking out the active support literature and the summaries, particularly the summaries by Stancliffe et al., Seeker et al., and more recently Toogood et al. Will summarize that evidence in the best way for you. I've got quite a flurry of questions coming in now, so I'll just pick up another one. How can active support be effective in a short break setting when we see children for only 5 hours per week or fortnight? Okay, this is a good question because obviously the pattern of support there will be intermittent. I think it can be effective if you're having children in and out of a setting on a regular basis. It can be effective in a way that will allow you to liaise with parents of children and to look into the pattern of support that those children receive and how that can be made more consistent and to better match the routines of the individual rather than trying to have the child adjust to the patterns of the short stay facility. There's a question here about training. Can you recommend any training to staff to assist them to learn more about PBS and how to provide active support? Well, there are many resources at Bild, and those would be a very good starting point. Have a look at the Bild website and see what's available there. In addition, there's the online training from the Cardiff team. We take the 3 levels of training there in positive behaviour support, and any number of courses that are advertised regularly via the web. There seems to be a general consensus that there's a strong link between active support and positive behaviour support. I've come across a suggestion that staff should train in AS and then PBS, but I wonder if there is any move to actually put these 2 concepts together into the same training course, which would be a more streamlined approach. Yeah, it's a really good point. I think the points of contact between active support and positive behaviour support really focus on the quality of life outcomes. So in PBS, quality of life is framed as an intervention as well as an outcome. And active support really focuses on enrichment. So there are 2 ways of thinking about this. One is active support as kind of level 1 prevention, and another way of thinking about it is active support in terms of pursuing quality of life outcomes. Now, in regard to putting these 2 concepts together within the same training course, yes, that's already been done, but I don't know to what extent it's been done in a more general sense. It's kind of interesting to notice the history in the development of the 2 approaches over a similar time period from the mid-80s to present day, and they have similar influences in regard to the framework of values derived from normalization theory and the framework of behavior analysis to inform their kind of working methods. And there's a kind of certain synergy between these 2 approaches, and I guess the links ought to be made perhaps more explicit. There's a nice article in the International Journal of Positive Behaviour Support by Ed Jones et al. That summarizes these kind of points of contact. Might be worth a read. Let's see what's next. How will we ensure that staff are valuing the people they support and offering opportunities for meaningful engagement? That's a really good question. The short answer to this is the way that we're sure about it is we immerse ourselves in those experiences as well. So one of the difficulties with active support is when we talk about it, it tends to appear strongly oriented on the kind of paper-based systems and strongly oriented toward a kind of a structured approach. And those things are sort of important, but the critical aspects of active support are in those moment-to-moment interactions. And the way we know about the quality of those is that we put ourselves in a position where we can actually, as I said, be immersed and we can experience it directly ourselves. And that's probably the best way of ensuring quality. One of the emerging themes in the active support literature is the critical role of what's known now as practice leadership, and that's about being in the places where these things take place and being a part of that. Let's see what else we have. Where could an organisation start when looking? Start when looking to implement an active support model? What training would you recommend for staff and teams? That's a big question. That's a sort of all depends question, really. I think for large organisations, probably a top-down approach might be the way to go. For smaller organisations, maybe thinking about establishing some of the active support ways of being in one or more small community homes to get some direct experience of it. In regards to where would you go for training, there are active support resources out there. There's stuff again through Bild, there's stuff through the Tizard Centre, there's manuals and DVDs that can be obtained through the Association for Real Change websites. So a number of resources available there. What are the most effective ways of evaluating improvements in choice, autonomy, and relationships? I think the answer to this is probably, again, immersion, being present in people's lives and in the services that those people receive, and making direct observations about behaviour that is associated with choosing and expressions of autonomy, and looking at the extent of a person's social networks and how those are developing over time. One of the defining features in positive behaviour support that we were talking about earlier is this notion of a lifespan perspective. And I think this is probably embedded into the thinking around active support as well. This is not a short-term treatment or an intervention that we do to people. This is a way of sharing a journey over the course of a person's life. And, you know, over time, people will encounter obstacles and difficulties, and it's about really addressing those in a kind of person-focused way, resolving issues, and then moving forward. How do you approach a situation when a client refuses to engage, even with personal care? Short answer to this is cautiously. I think that sometimes if a person's life experience has been characterized by passivity, then invitations or opportunities to engage in activity can seem somewhat challenging to that individual. And therefore the task is to use, or our approach is to use this notion of task analysis, of breaking the situation down into tiny steps, and looking for opportunities for a person to engage in the smallest part of that activity, and then building that up over time. And there are some useful techniques. If it's difficult to get a person to the activity, then think about taking the activity to the person. Be flexible. In the Tizard active support materials, they talk about little and often, and this is a kind of a sensible way of approaching a situation when a person might appear to be unwilling to participate in activity. There's a question here about how much time do we think support workers should spend in classroom training and on-site training. In my experience, between 1 and 2 days is helpful for the classroom-based training. Really, that is focused on exploring some of the ideas and then generating what we call product. And the product really is things like activity scripts and personal routines that are relevant to the individual staff work with. And then the on-site training, about 2 hours per person, at least to get going, and then a less formal system of observation, feedback, and coaching embedded into the practice leadership role. So there's a question here about scripts. Are there any good examples of scripts? I don't know that there are any good examples of scripts that have been published, but I'm sure we can find a way to make some available via Bild. Right. Another question here about evaluating effective ways of evaluating improvements in choice, autonomy, and relationships. So I think I may have dealt with that one. I'm sorry. What is the biggest barrier to the adoption of active support models and services? I don't know that there's one single biggest barrier, but I think a significant challenge is often in persuading staff that offering people the opportunity to run their own lives is a worthwhile objective. A lot of people come into this line of work in order to care for people, and sometimes the notion of caring is invested in doing things for people rather than helping people to do things for themselves. And this is a fairly strongly held belief, and quite a powerful ethic in a lot of services in the UK at least. And maybe just persuading people that what appears on the surface to be quite mundane things, as I think I mentioned in my presentation, things that are very ordinary, and for a lot of people not at the top of the list of what they would choose to do themselves, but extending those opportunities to people with disabilities in services, just how liberating that can be, and persuading people of that is sometimes challenging and worth spending some time on. This question here: young people I know have autism, but IQ over 17 need support to be engaged and active. They are classed as not having intellectual disability and in our area excluded from support. How can we as parents trying to use some of this stuff? Again, I think it's taking the basic principles and applying these basic principles flexibly. One of the things that has been observed in the active support research is that a predictor of engagement levels is the behavioural ability of the individual and the support and assistance that that person receives to be engaged. So I think with people who are behaviourally more able, relatively speaking more able, the approach there would be to have very clear expectations, to provide the appropriate amount of support and assistance, but also motivation to be engaged in activity, and to use the principles of breaking down complex activities into smaller steps, but also thinking about how activities are sequenced so that high preference activities are low preference activities are interspersed with high preference activities in order to keep that momentum moving forward. And the last question here is how do you embed active support within the organisation? Again, there's no short answer to this question. It's quite a difficult. Quite a large question to address in this context, but I think that the embedding of active support is an ongoing enterprise. So an organisation that was beginning to implement active support would have to attend to the development aspects of implementation, maybe across a number of service areas. But at the same time, begin to make plans for maintaining its implementation over time. Now, the implementation of active support is documented in some of the active support research. So we see maintenance effects over a period of up to 12 months. But of course, again, thinking back to this notion of a lifespan perspective, we need to be able to arrange supports that are much more enduring than that in regard to people's lives. Now, there are one or two examples in case examples, more than group research, that demonstrate active support procedures being maintained over a period of more than a decade to some extent. But these aspects of maintenance are not automatic. They don't tend to occur by themselves, and we have to invest usually in systems of monitoring the quality and the implementation over time, and giving services and staff feedback on performance. A couple more questions coming in now, just have a look at these. Can you talk about active support and the role of families? Yeah, I can. Again, I think one of the things I tried to cover in my talk today is the breadth of spread in regard to active support. Sometimes people think about active support as being getting people to do housework, and that is a kind of a critical component, because most of us spend quite a lot of time doing exactly those sorts of things. And I think that the role of families really extends into maintaining, sustaining relationships, and how activity can be a vehicle for doing that, but also how families can contribute to this notion of consistency in the nature and type of support that people receive. Spending time with family is an important outcome, and I think it probably, thinking back in terms of people that I've been involved in supporting over the years, I suppose it's a great way for families and service workers to collaborate and to work together to improve everybody's lived experience. Okay, I'm just scrolling down. There's a question here about, in a risk-averse culture, how do you instill confidence to change and take measured everyday risks? That's a really good question. This can be quite challenging, and a lot of services that I come into contact with, there's a real and proper concern to manage risk, but there's a difference, isn't there, between managing risk and avoiding risk. And I think, again, my answer is, or my suggestion here is going to be cautiously. So, in a risk-averse culture, how do you instill confidence? I think the answer is carefully, one step at a time, and to think about balancing risk with opportunity. Very often, these are going to be person-specific decisions, context-specific decisions, and will need to be addressed carefully. Does active support have a role to play in avoiding inappropriate hospital admissions? Yes, I think it does. Critically, again, coming back to the quality of life, and if admission to hospital is related to the occurrence of challenging behaviour, I'm assuming that that's implied in this question. Then engagement and opportunity and community presence and relationships and having the power of control over day-to-day matters are all characteristics of life that are valued by people and tend to be associated with an enriched lifestyle, and an enriched lifestyle is a lifestyle that tends to make challenging behaviour ineffective or irrelevant. Okay, how would you build ABS into supervision? ABS, I'm not quite sure what ABS is here, but if we're thinking about active support into supervision, there's an opportunity for supervision to be practice-based rather than talk-based. Or as well as talk-based. The talk-based supervision is kind of important, but I think one of the features of active support is that it focuses on what people do, and that is what users of services do from time to time, but also what staff do from time to time in providing that support. So how do you build it into supervision? Well, you have the supervisors in the workplace doing direct observations, sort of as discussed earlier. maybe just time for one or two more questions. This is quite a long question, so I just want to read it. Okay, so this is a fairly long question. I'll try and summarize it. So the suggestion is that there's an imposed juxtaposition on the use of active support with those with intellectual disabilities who are detained in secure settings, often with staff acting as agents of social control. So where do you see the development of active support and its inherent social valorization being nurtured within such secure settings? I think what the question is getting at here is the extent to which active support can be provided meaningfully in secure settings, and how do we separate staff being agents of social control from being enablers. My first observation on this question would be that the secure settings are often designed in a way that deny people opportunities. So a lot of the services that people receive in secure settings are not dissimilar to the institutional settings that I talked about in my presentation now. So that food and catering are kind of done centrally. The cleaning is done by cleaners, etc., etc. So those opportunities for engaging in ordinary everyday activities are not always going to be available in the extent that they would be in natural environments. But that doesn't mean so you can't use active support procedures and start building opportunities for people to do those sorts of things, with a view to those individuals being reinstated into communities at some point in the future. And the question about staff being agents of social control is really about the quality of implementation insofar as the role of staff is really to work as enablers, to provide support and assistance and motivation rather than demand and control. So just going back to that basic idea of the environment having those properties associated with support and assistance rather than demand and control, and plenty of opportunity for interaction, contingent mainly on behaviour that's not described as challenging, and the environment providing the maximum amount of opportunity for engagement. Those would be the characteristics of the environment to pursue. And there may be limits imposed by the nature of the physical aspects, the architecture, and the way that the service is designed and delivered. But working within those limits, you can make some move in the direction of travel that would more closely correspond to what a person would do back at home. Okay, so this is the last one here. So it would be great to see a list of the training resources you mentioned, and also some advice on how to engage a consultant to work with organisations. So I'm sure we can make those resources available via Bild's good offices. So I think that's more or less all the questions that I can see on my screen that I've tried to address. So with that, I think time now to hand back to Bild.
On behalf of Bild and the Centre for the Advancement of Positive Behaviour Support, I'd like to thank Dr Sandy Toogood for today's webinar. Can I just remind everyone that the slides for this presentation are now available to download from the Bild website at the address given earlier, or just click on the webinar's advert on the front of the Bild website. A link to watch this webinar in full, on demand, will also be available there later, and that link will be sent to everyone who's registered for this webinar in an email in a few days' time. And that page also gives information about the other webinars in our series. Registration for the next webinar by Professor Kathy Lowe and Dr Edwin Jones of the Abertawe Bro Morgannwg University Health Board on practice leadership, getting PBS right at the front line, which will take place on the 8th of November, registration for that webinar will open shortly, and we look forward to you joining us for that one too. But finally, thanks again to Dr. Sandy Toogood for his excellent presentation today. Goodbye.